Hello and welcome. Proclamation News and Gatherance. What we talk about my academic year investigating the social world module DD 103. So I want to say thank you for coming in. Hopefully some of you could be students coming through. What is the benefits of students coming through to listen to what introduction is the fact that I'm reading out the module book for you, and you can sit comfortable in your bed. Rather than read, you can just listen in and take notes in. You can start writing notes that might help you for your assignment as well. Um, Page 20, we can start page 24 just in case. Investigating the social world. It's the introduction, page 24. Of economic security and indeed a number of the UDHR's 30 declaration, known as articles, do relate to this. For example, Article 22. As a member of society, has a right to social security and is entitled to realisation of the economic, social and cultural rights indispensable for his dignity and the free development of his personality. Article 23, 2 of 4. Everyone has the right to work, to free choice for employment, to just and favourable conditions of work, and to protection against unemployment. Anyone without any discrimination has the right to equal pay for equal work. How effectively states implement economic rights such as these differs significantly. In the UK, many rights may be seen associated with being able to freely consume and spend money. These economic rights may be largely achieved by citizens being able to affordably purchase many goods produced in countries such as India, Bangladesh, Turkey, or China, suggesting that workers in those countries have far from equal rights compared to Western consumers. On the other hand, for Gran Zarago's residents, improved social and economic security and access to work, at least when compared with rural conditions in parts of China, have been driven by these global market conditions, finally by financing through borrowing. The government of Gran Zarago may be able to secure both its own rights, as well as those of its citizens, even if such debts also bring risks. 3.4. Growth and rights in Gran Zarago. A significant challenge to social science research is that many social processes are about movement and change, and so require protracted and detailed study in order to capture developmental patterns such as the impact of debt, population growth and changes to livelihoods, the movement of people, as well as the knowledge, goods and environmental impacts associated with these movements, are all important considerations when thinking about how these dynamic processes might impact upon its rights. We will now look at migration and land in Gran Zarago's development to consider some of the evidence. Akuru, a system of social management. In China, the whole population is classified as belonging to one of two groups, urban or rural. Under the Hukou, or household registration system, the system was implemented in 1958 to administer the distribution of state resources and control rural-urban migration. Under the socialist system, people were given ration cards to buy food and goods at subsidised prices. Those people were not resident in the place, but they held their haiku status were not mentioned to access the rationing cards. Today, despite the growth of the cities and the market-orientated reforms, As well as pressures from businesses and social activists, the system remains largely in place. Although people are much freer to move, more people and their children with no hukou in place where they live, with enormous difficulties assessing jobs, education, healthcare, and welfare relief. Can you see the way they're acting through inequalities there for the struggle? They give out rationing cards for their own citizens, but then you got um, what's the word? The immigration people. They don't get the rationing cards or the hukou, whatever they're called. I don't know how to pronounce that word. Gran Zago's expansion highlights the scale of the challenge these poses for any migrant workers and their families in moving to a city which nonetheless relies on the movement of millions of rural migrants, as well as workforce to support its growth. The Guardian, the story of cities. The series of Sala 2016 examined the city of Zhenchuan, one of Gran Zago's neighbouring cities of the Pearl River Delta. It stated that of the city's current 11 million residents, only a quarter hold urban identity cards, according to China's haiku system. Significantly, this is also a figure which does not include undocumented workers. A specific concern raised as a hukou system is that different of rural migrant workers face the problem of being denied education in Gran Zago despite their parents working there, as they were only entitled to attend school where they are held for their Hoku status. Moves have been made for people to change their Hoku status more readily. But to be recognised as a permanent resident in Gran Zago City, migrants need to demonstrate they have 5 years continuous employment and made 3 years payment of social security taxes. I think 2014, city governments such as Gran Zago would like to tax their migrant population in the same way as the residents' population in order to fund public services and service public debts. But that would mean supporting migrant access to local services, including education. Land transformation in Gran Zago. City planner Yuan Queffing says, I think China's development is easy to explain. China has become the global manufacturing house, the open university. He, he links the transformation from China's status to globalization and the interest of global capital. Seeking out low cost, China's development in turn is then promoted by growing awareness of these manufacturing opportunities. This transformation within Gran Zago, as well as other Chinese cities, has seen the conversion of the vast areas of land and cheap labour into making of products. For the rest of the world, and importantly, the money raised from selling land was a key source of financial support for Gran Zago. This has also presented challenges in relation to availability of land and how land might be needed in the future. Land used for farming being sold and transformed for business and residential use. This has meant that rural collective run land upon which the state prohibits construction has had to be converted to state run land. The Prime Minister gave specific permission to sell land and get money from overseas investors. So Gran Zago sold land around the Pearl River. As I remember, they got 20 or 30 billion RMB. Yuan Queffing quoted the Open University 2016. In thinking about how these changes to migration and land transformation impact upon rights, it is useful to return to the UNDHR. Below are 3 further articles for this document which relate to the issue raised in relation to Gran Zago. Articles 13. Everyone has the right to freedom of movement and resident within the borders of each state. Article 17. Everyone has a right to own property alone, as well as in association with others. Not one shall be arbitrarily deprived of his property. Article 26. Everyone has a right to education. Education shall be free, at least elementary or fundamental stages. Elementary education shall be a compulsory. Parents have a prior right to choose the kind of education that they shall be given to their children. Let's look at this activity. Reflecting on the statements contained in the three UDR articles above. In what ways do you think protection rights of Grand Zago have deviated from these principles? Everyone has a right to own property alone, whereas association of others. No one shall be arbitrarily deprived of this property. Everyone has a right to freedom movement and residence with. It sounds like a bit of a communist, but it is, isn't it? It is communism over in China anyway. Taking each of these articles in turn, starting with Article 13, we might reflect on the fact that while physical movement between rural and urban areas is possible, there are significant implications of movement for individual rights because of restrictions imposed by the hierarchical system. This raises a broader point about rights in what they can often highlight a disjuncture between support for the principles and in practice, similarly, Article 17 highlights a right to property, which may be offered a principle through Grand Argo's buoyant property development activity, but with the land becoming increasingly sought after and therefore expensive, it is likely that much of the housing sector will become too expensive for migrant workers in low-paid jobs, as we've seen above. The aspirations expressed in the article at 26 are another right tested on the hierarchical system, where access to education is restricted for the children of migrant workers. Studying Grand Zargo, reflecting on the evidence. While there are many and varied types of evidence used by the social scientists, some easier to categorize than others. Social science evidence can be broadly and simply divided into two types of quantitative and qualitative. Quantitative evidence can be counted and turned into percentages or other numerical data, for example, population numbers or percentage of people who gave certain answers in the survey. Qualitative evidence that aims to understand particular aspects of social life in depth, usually through small samples using methods such as one-to-one or small group interviews. Within these two categories, there are also differences, for examples. Some quantitative evidence may be directly measured, such as China's gross national income, a measurement of the total income of the country, or the growth of Gran Zago's population. Other quantitative evidence data may translate what might ordinarily be considered qualitative information, such as how happy people are, into quantitative data by asking respondents to answer questions about their happiness and rating the responses on a scale of 1 to 10 or by ticking boxes labelled with adjectives such as ecstatic, very happy, neither happy or unhappy. The data generated by these responses then become quantitative evidence by qualitating and continuing and then calculating responses in percentage terms. Qualitative data may be gathered directly from individuals or groups through observation or for unrestricted responses from open questioning such as residents of Gran Zago being asked about their experiences living in the city. It may be also gathered indirectly through the social or news media, as well as a range of other sources such as biography, film, theatre, poetry, and music. Arguably, evidence is never perfect. While some may argue that the quantitative measures are more reliable, others may challenge this, arguing that the measuring of categorization process is itself socially subject and reflects certain social values. For example, in monitoring income for GNI measures, non-officials or black market income would not be included. Social science investigation takes steps to make evidence collection as reliable and valid as possible. But sometimes there may be trade-offs in the process, for example. It may be hard to achieve an authentic sense of understanding an individual or local experience. For example, Grand Argo, while also ensuring that the evidence is useful in addressing broader issues of the relationship between debt, rapid urban development, and rights in other places, something which might require data from large number of people and or contexts. Activity 6. Reflecting on the Grand Argos case study, consider how both quantitative and qualitative forms of evidence have been used. Looking back at the various sources that are used here, there are examples of both quantitative and qualitative evidence. Quantitative evidence is used in the form data from the IMF and providing the figure of 11 million as being the number of residents of Grand Argos neighbouring city of Shenzhen. The last source in the article from the Guardian newspaper, Salia 2016, and will have contained some qualitative evidence too, such as quotes from experts. The source of information on the history of Haiku system is also a mixture of quantitative and qualitative evidence. There is also reference to an interview with planner Yuan Quipping, which in itself is a form of qualitative evidence. Although he refers to some statistical data, which would be qualitative evidence. Purely qualitative evidence is provided in a quote from Travel Guide, which provides an illustration of how Grand Argo is experienced as a place by visitors. It is commonly the case for the strongest body of evidence, which will contain a balance of both qualitative and quantitative information, as is the case here. While some sources are solely one form of evidence, many are a combination that contain elements of both. This chapter has introduced you to the following key learning areas and skills. Topic of money. Here in the form of debt as another influence which makes the world go round, but also presenting issues that are challenging for societies to resolve. Any business you take on board always becomes debt eventually anyway. Do you want to be financing a business for the debt, really, though? You know? Anyway, page 30, investigating the social world. The theme of rights. The difference and sometimes conflict in ways which they can be interpreted and challenges in maintaining a fixed understanding of them in the face of changing social and economic circumstances. The value of looking at case studies here through the example of the city of Grand Argo. The different forms of evidence and how they are used by social producing and consuming introduction the theme of justice. In this section, we turn to the role of money in the form of consumption and production. In some respects, we have already looked at consumption and production process, as in, for example, the role of Grand Argo and other cities in China, producing for global consumer markets. As a growing city population, Grand Argo's population consumes and brings taxable income to the city, which in turn supports further growth. In this section, we take this opportunity to look both at producing and consuming in more details. The production and consumption of coffee will be our main focus. We also introduce a third theme, that of justice concerns about which arise in all the social science disciplines. We start with exploring production and consumption before introducing coffee as our case study. Then we look at the theme of justice to apply it to the coffee case study. As in previous sections, there are activities to reinforce your conceptual learning about justice and the social science debates it connects to. The section finishes with some advice on referencing, something that you have to develop as you go through the module. While study production and consumption, because with production you learn how much coffee, say coffee bean, how much coffee beans you're producing and how much is consumed. So how much you're spending and how much how much you're spending, how much you're selling. Are you it's more being consumption than you are producing, because you're going to have a big debt business. You do need more production. You need to make consumption, but at the same time, you need to weigh up the pros and cons, don't you? Otherwise, you're not have a good run business. Turn your attention to products that are consumed. We're again some of the ways in which money, but also people and the context that support and constrain them, really make the world go round. This matters because social lives are impacted on by international and global process, and there are relationships of power and inequality that shape these. We tend to visualize production in terms of factories or perhaps farms, and consumption in terms of goods such as food or technology products. On the other hand, we should bear in mind that the less tangible products, such as knowledge, media output, and social participation, can be seen as produced and consumed, along with less attractive environmental impacts such as rubbish dumps, toxic effects, and the air we breathe, and long-term erosion of land. Production and consumption are complex processes which involve a range of social actors. Social scientists can often refer to actors to describe people or organizations in any context who could be who can be individuals, protest groups, unions, businesses, politicians, states, among others. Using this term helps remind us of all the roles that people and groups have in making things happen, potentially constraining them, and the importance of considering how they might be in particular contexts of their study or research, as well as considering the range of actors who are part of producing and consuming. Social scientists have different ways of framing process of actors involved, so as to study more easily, because there is an interlink, then they are usually referred to as a production and consumption chain. Production, how and why people produce something. Exchange, how ownership of a product is negotiated. Disruption, the movement of the product across space and over time. Distribution is consumption, how and why people consume the product. Consumption can be promising, a circular process whereby the exchange of money promotes continued production of existing products or new production process. In Grand Argo, we saw how the state may also play a role in facilities or constrains one or more of the four stages suggested here. This is page 32. As happened in terms of the state shaping new policies to enable certain types of land to be recharacterised for business or residential use. So that new process of production could begin, such as house building or business construction, investigating money and coffee. Earlier in this block, you learned about money evolved as a way of enabling the trade goods, a series between people and live in different parts of the world. The trade of coffee across the globe may be possible because of the exchange of money. There are a number of stages in the process of transforming a coffee seed into a roasted bean that we brew to make our daily cup. At the stage, money changes hands so that the final price of cup of coffee in a coffee shop represents much more than just the cost of a raw coffee bean. The breakdown of coffee that make up your coffee. I'll read it out to you. Coffee bean is about 8p. You got milk, about 8p. Cups, stirrers, napkins, 60p. Shops, cost, rent, 66p. You got staff, 55p. You got tax, 36p. You got a profit, 30p. Retail price, all that adding together, is £2.20 in a coffee shop. So what it actually costs of what you're drinking is 16p. The rest is staff, profit, and tax. So there you go. Anyway, figure 2 reveals that just 8p of £2.20 cup of coffee is spent on coffee. Rent to the coffee shop, staff wages and taxes taking up considerable proportion of the overall cost. While the coffee shop makes 30% profit of each cup of the coffee it sells, the farmer who plants, cultivates and picks the coffee receives only a share of the 8p portion of coffee. That portion must be split between coffee roasters, importers, exporters, haulage companies and farmers, all of whom hope to make the business of exchanging coffee a profitable venture. It is not always easy for everyone in the coffee chain to secure a fair share. This inequality can feed into a sense of injustice that in turn affects the way coffee is both produced and consumed. Mad, isn't it? That you think the world is so many lunatics in the world. I mean, how many people go and sit and have a coffee, or well, look how many people go sit down in a pub and have a beer when you can buy them for like £1 a tin in a shop. Doesn't make no sense. People don't care about paying a couple of quid for a coffee when they go and spend £6 down a pub for a pint of beer. Off their head, mate. Some people. All three of the module themes are returned to the further detail for different social science disciplinary investigation as a module progress. However, as the inequality and the rights, we want you to get off to a good start by thinking about justice. The theme of justice connected to this week's study of coffee, as you will discover later when we explore how a fairer or more just deal with being secured for coffee producers through schemes such as fair trade. When thinking about the theme justice, it might be easy to start thinking about injustice first. For this activity, note down an example of an injustice and consider your kind of debates is raised in society about justice. As before, there aren't examples of right and wrong answers to this. As you may note, a number of different kinds of justice in relation to your example. This could include, for example, legal justice related to state justice systems, but also justice to relate a range of institutions such as police and tax policy and collection. You may have noted the relationship between inequality and perhaps rights, and also justice in relation to inequality. Concerns about justice are often expressed in relation to the concept of distributive justice, referring to how justice and fairness is distributed between different people and groups of people. Distributive justice often refers to a fair distribution of resources, be it money or specific resources such as land, education and health. Within a society may refer to the distribution of resources between different classes of social economic groups, between regions, a country, and between rural and urban areas. Distributive justice also concerns global distributive justice concerning the fairness of distribution and resources globally, for example, in relation to trade justice. Coffee is a good example of this, concerning income and wealth injustice, such as between the global north, south, and of different groups and regions within different societies globally. Environmental and climate justice or injustice may concern how far issues about environmental impacts are regulated, or alternatively, leave certain groups in society with unfair consequences relating to health risk or climate disasters. The people that are receiving injustice are the farmers that collect the coffee beans, working day and night, and they get peanuts. They put in about 30p a day in Ethiopia. They get nothing. Um, a culture of consumption. Why does it matter to the social sciences? If you're a coffee drinker, consider how to take your coffee. If you're not, think about somebody you know who does. Or your experience of coffee bars, even just from the outside. You might take cappuccino. To be honest with you, if you drink alcohol, it's not even worth you thinking about your friends that go and drink coffee in a coffee shop, because if you spend five on alcohol in it, for one drink or whatever, you're an idiot. Filter skinny latte, espresso, instant, mojito, fair trade, organic, Ethiopian coffee, and you might drink it at home or at a coffee shop. The possibilities can seem endless. And different countries have different traditions of coffee consumption. Furthermore, we, we can learn a considerable amount. The organisation of society and the nature of social practices by studying it. What seems like a matter of individual choice is revealed to be part of a much wider interconnected web of collective forces, for example. Your choice of coffee is very likely linked to the system or coffee provision in your country, the supermarket, coffee shops, coffee machines and technologies that offer and prepare the coffee you consume. Your country's historical trading partnership with colonies that produce particular types of coffee beans. Public policy and legislative systems that regulate things such as temperature and hot drinks, the amount of caffeine uh, present for a drink to be labelled as decaffeinated, or the prices that can be charged for basic goods, national and regional and institutional policies. Consistent with an EU policy in EU member countries may also determine which countries are more or less likely to produce the coffee we consume. The ways which different types of coffee experience are advertised to you through the media, reinforced by cultural referencing, such as on popular TV programs, influenced by your friends and family. These commercial technologies, regulatory, and social culture context, mediated through the social communication message, create and sustain distinctive cultures, coffee consumption within a country, which is turned shapes and valued assigned to this commodity. Thus, while their analytic framework helps us to understand relationships in the production of consumption chain, we can also use it to look more closely at the social roles of how and the values it ascribes to products, access, and different actors. It is thus often referred to as a value chain. Table 1, the values of coffee chain. The value of coffee and the value of people. The coffee is handpicked, washed, and in some cases dried before being sold to an intermediary. The coffee is processed and dried at this stage. Oh, that's the mill, the farm, the exporter. I'm not really. I'll read it anyway. The freight and the haulage. The coffee is loaded to a container and transported to its destination. The importer container loads of coffee and stored, graded and checked before the distributed to their consumers. The roaster. The coffee is roasted, packaged, and distributed to consumers such as coffee shops, supermarkets, and any other company. The retail. The coffee is sold to the consumer. Table 1 illustrates all the simple facts of coffee, and we are complete idiots if we didn't know that answer. Page 37. Table 1 illustrates some of the actors and the stages of the coffee chain, even through its still simplification. It suggests the simple complexity in the process, changes, and the social system across different contexts in society. Distributive system. Distributive justice could be looked at by social scientists in terms of monetary value transferred to each of these states, and itself could give us a view about the reality of this disruptive justice. But it's also awareness of part of different actors in society concerned with fairness and unfairness in the coffee and value chain. Society concerned with fairness and unfairness in coffee value chain. Large coffee manufacturers such as Nestle and Altria, formerly Kraft, are capitalizing on their position in the upper part of the value chain, taking a chunk of profits that are odds with the poverty of the many coffee farmers experience. During the 1990s, in a part as a response to the so-called coffee crisis, when prices fell so low that farmers experienced devastating poverty, the, the now popular fair trade scheme was developed, which paid farmers a minimum price for their coffee. Another model of the trade promotes stable coffee trades. Coffee pricing, greater justice in coffee buying, relationship and direct trade. This involves making direct business relationships between farmers and roasters and agreeing price for all coffee. By forming personal relationships, farmers are able to get a good price for their coffee, and roasters can buy a high quality product in reasonably stable price. On the other hand, in other contexts, such as where employers or market representatives might threaten to fine alternative workers if they don't accept a certain price or conditions, for example, some small scale farmers may have to communicate differently and potentially with little opportunity challenge it at all. And thus, it may be more challenging for positive action to happen. Thus, producing and consuming should be considered not simply as relating to the coffee grounds that go into making our cappuccino, but in relation to how they apply through the different mediums of production and consumption. This may also turn to shape intervention for the summer side with greater willingness to demand fair trade products, pay fair trade prices and or to become in international support groups and non-governmental organisations, NGO. Social science understands of justice. For the final time of an introductory book, you should, after reading guidance below, review the case of consuming and producing the coffee and to consider it in relation to social science concept, this time of justice. Hopefully, we are gaining confidence in using different social science understandings and developing your skills and conceptual learning as you go along. Here we make us use the work of Nancy Fraser, a leading social scientist in the field politics and philosophy, and whose work, along with that of other authors on justice, you will come to gain in Block 4. Very briefly, some key points. Of Fraser relate to firstly justice requiring partially and participation, whereby all individuals ought to be in a position to participate as peers. In Social Life, Fraser 2009, Part 6, page 16. At a first glance, we might think about the means that everyone should have equal access to certain resources. However, individuals and groups of individuals are often different, which different needs and therefore may be differential treatment to be given special resources in order to create a level playing field. Secondly, this is partially of participation needs to be sought for all the individuals, and thus that we are considered the implication for justice across and between, as well as within different society states, as Fraser notes. Decisions taken in territorial state have often an impact on the lives of those outside, as do the actions of transnational cooperation, international currency speculators, and large institutional investors. Make a note how Fraser's views of justice and summarised above might suggest different questions and concerns about justice with reference to production and consumption of coffee. Did anyone get that? Because I didn't. There are two elements to Fraser's argument highlighted above. The first is the potential for equal and at least fair participation of possibilities, and the second focuses on the need for it to be considered something that is potentially international and global in reach. In relation to the example of coffee discussed in this section, you can see how both elements are relevant. First, regarding equal fair participation, what Fraser calls parity of participation. We could, as social scientists, seek to investigate the means by which producers are given a fairer deal in terms of profits generated by the production and consumption of coffee. How can producers, i.e. farmers, involved in harvesting, washing and drying the beans through schemes such as fair fair trade and direct trade, which give a fairer share of profits to producers. Naturally, the profits can be shared completely equally between all stages of production and consumption process, as are different costs involved. The wages and costs of different countries, for example, but given a fairer, more just share, the producers can benefit. Consumers also benefit from the sense that they are buying more um, ethically, are also given choice of what they can consume, as well as becoming more connected and aware of the issue involved in its production. Second, as Fraser highlights, there are adjusted implications across borders, which has become global in scope. We can look into different stages of the coffee production chain. Then, appetite for coffee consumption in one country directly affects the whole range of actors across the world. A large multinational company such as Starbucks, where someone buys their cup of coffee, or a manufacturer that produces coffee for sale supermarkets, will have a global network of employees and a huge infrastructure. I'm not page 40. I'm gonna stop there. I've got another 10 pages of that book to go. I'm not gonna go mad. I might even finish the book later. But thank you everyone for joining in. Really appreciate everyone. Love you guys. Thank you so much. Yeah, page 40 I'm on. So yeah, love you. Take care. One love. Speak soon. God bless. Thank you.